Did you know that Steve Jobs initially didn't even want an iPad? He famously said, people don't want tablets, they want keyboards. They want, a laptop with a keyboard where you can type and do stuff. But another quote that he had perfectly encapsulates the iPad. He said that he wanted something that was more intimate than a laptop, but so much more capable than a phone. Now we have the iPad. And today, the iPad is Apple's most fascinating and controversial product, with iPadOS 18, the hardware being incredible, the software being crappy. But where did it all begin? Even though Steve Jobs said he wanted a much more capable than a smartphone device, the initial iPad, just from looks alone, looked like a bigger phone. The hardware was great, but the software just felt like a bigger phone. Where have I heard that before? But did you know that they started working on the iPad in 2002? In 2002, they were working on a device with touchscreen and things like that, and they ended up scrapping the device because it was just too expensive to make. Come around to 2007, they bring the idea back, revive it, and now we have the first iPhone. 2010, they bring out the first iPad, using everything that they had from 2002 and then 2007. So the first iPad could not have happened without the breakthroughs of the first iPhone. And I honestly think that's so cool. The lore behind the iPad. Even though not everyone loved it at first, the iPad still became one of the most popular tablets ever. And I think right now it is the most popular tablet ever. Despite Steve Jobs thinking it would fail, and despite a lot of people making fun of it, making fun of the name, making fun of a lot of different aspects of it, this thing sold wildly when it came out in 2010. Like, I remember going to a friend's house. She had like the 3rd gen iPad, and it was my first time ever seeing an iPad, and it just looked like a bigger phone. And I was like, why would she have that? She already has an iPhone. But now I see it. Now I see the vision all the way back from 2002 to 7 to 10, all the way to 2024. I see the vision of the iPad. But let's start at the beginning. In 2010, Steve Jobs goes up and he unveils a device that is more intimate than a laptop and more capable than a smartphone. In 2010, it had a multi-touch display, ambient light sensor, accelerometer, cellular options. It started at $499 with a 9.7-inch screen. The first iPad had no camera, no selfie camera or a rear camera, and it had the A4 processor. For its time, that was okay, but nothing compared to what we have now. It had 256 megabytes of RAM. That is nothing in today's time. It's so crazy to see 256 megabytes of RAM was a thing 14 years ago. Now that is equivalent to nothing. Now that we have, 256 gigabytes of RAM in some computers. Also rocked 16 to 64 gigs of storage. But just 1 year later, Apple comes out with the 2nd generation iPad. This iPad was very similar in looks, but it added a gyroscope, a digital compass, and it was 33% thinner and 15% lighter than its predecessor. So now this tablet is becoming more and more the slab of glass that essentially is today. Same price, $499, which today they start at $329. So iPad's gone down a lot in price, which I think is awesome. Same 9.7-inch screen, added a camera, front and selfie camera, had the A5 processor, but RAM and storage options did not go up. So this was kind of just a spec bump with half the specs. The iPad 3, in my opinion, it's basically an iPad 2.1. Came out a year later, 2012, had a Retina display and quad-core graphics. So it was better graphically, much better screen quality. 33% thinner, 8% lighter. Same price, same cameras, had the A5X processor, so a little bit more powerful. Same RAM and storage options. So it's 256 megabytes and 16 to 64 gigs of storage. But a few months later in the same year, the iPad 4 came out in 2012. The iPad 4 and the iPhone 4 are both, I feel like, revolutionary products in their line of products, if that makes sense. This was the first iPad to have a lightning connector. It was the same size as the 3, but it had 2 times the processing speed and 2 times the graphics speed. That's a jump. That's almost double the jump. It is double the jump. Same price, $429, 9.7-inch screen, same crappy 7 megapixel and 3 megapixel cameras, but this time it went up a generation, the chip, the A6X processor, same RAM and storage. After the iPad 4, the base model iPad was silent. During this time, they released the iPad minis and the iPad Airs. These products gained a lot of traction, and the iPad mini came with a lot of scrutiny, and the iPad Air was really cool when it first came out. It was just supposed to be a much thinner version of the iPad, more powerful. It was essentially the iPad Pro of its day, and now we have the Pro though. 5 years later, in 2017, Apple announces the iPad 5th generation, the iPad 5. 25% brighter display, and now it had Hey Siri support. It rocked 2 stereo speakers and now had no mute switch. The iPad 4 was the last iPad with a mute switch. 9.7-inch screen, 8 megapixel rear camera, and 1.2 megapixel selfie camera. So the cameras are getting better. The specs on the inside are getting a little bit better. Had the A9 processor. Now it had 2 gigabytes of RAM. So massive jump in RAM, 32 to 128 gigabytes of storage. All of these seem like huge jumps because it was a 5-year jump. In between this time with the iPad Airs and the minis, the processor and the RAM had been going up on all of those, but this is the first time we've seen it in the base model iPad. Just 1 year later, Apple came out with the iPad 6. This is the first iPad base model to have the Apple Pencil support. This was the Lightning Apple Pencil that plugged into the bottom of the iPad. It was okay for what it was, but now we have much better options. It's practically useless. The iWork suite was now pre-installed. It had a gold color, and they took out the camera flash. I don't know why they took it out, maybe to add more room in the iPad for other stuff, but it doesn't seem like that big of a component. But that's just me. Started at $329 still. I love that Apple's keeping the base model iPads at the same price every year. Even though the Pros and stuff are going up, the base model iPad has always stayed the same until the iPad 10. But even that now is like $350. So it's gone down significantly than what it was when it first came out. And same 9.7-inch screen, same cameras, had the A10 processor, 2 gigs of RAM. This time they took out the middle storage options. There's only 2 storage options, 32 and 128 gigs of storage. So you can't have anything in the middle. It's just a little bit of storage or too much storage for that time. I don't know. iPad 7 came out in 2019, still rocked the Apple Pencil 1, had better Bluetooth this time, Bluetooth 4.2, Lightning, and had a smart connector now too. So you could add a smart keyboard with the, the pogo pins on the back, smart keyboard, and I don't think there was actually any other accessories that used the pogo pins. But hey, same price though, $329, and this time, first time the regular iPad got a jump in size. Now it's a 10.2-inch screen. This time we go up to 3 gigabytes of RAM. Same storage options, 32 and 128 gigs of storage, nothing in the middle. The iPad 8, again, this one felt like an S year. Everything is the same. No new features. Came out in 2020, had that same Apple Pencil support, same Bluetooth, Lightning, smart connector, same price, 10.2-inch screen. Same cameras. The only difference is the A12 processor and the same storage options as well, the 32 and 128 gigabytes of storage. But then you jump one more year and you have the iPad 9th generation, and it's starting to get a little bit spicier. You jump one more generation and the iPad 9, there really isn't a lot to it compared to the 8 and that compared to the 7. Apple Pencil, but this time they took away the gold color for the iPad. They added center stage. So that was pretty cool for the selfie camera. They added center stage. You can, have multiple people in the frame and stuff. I remember when they announced it, I thought it was pretty cool. It was during the whole Zoom era. 10.2-inch screen, same cameras, A13 processor, again, a little bit more powerful, 3 gigs of RAM, but now the storage has been doubled. So you have either 64 gigs or 256 gigs of storage, nothing in the middle. Over those few years, it feels like Apple was doing a lot of work on the iPad 10 because the iPad 10 was the big redesign. That was the huge iPad. But the last 3 years before that, iPad was pretty crappy. So now we have the iPad 10th generation. Came out in 2022. Still rocked the Apple Pencil 1, but the iPad had USB-C, and so it was a kind of weird way to charge the pencil. It was honestly a hot mess, and now Apple has the USB-C Apple Pencil, which is fine for this iPad because you couldn't use the Apple Pencil 2nd generation on the Pro that were worked on the Pros on this new iPad. Even though the iPad 10 looked just like an iPad Air or an iPad Pro, full screen design, had the Touch ID on the side. It had a liquid retina display, had center stage, 10.9-inch screen, just like the Air. This time it started at a similar price to the Air, $450, $449. So this is a huge jump, but now that iPad is like $350. So back to what the base model iPads used to always be. That is a great price for the base model iPad. I think that is the price that they should stick with. This time it had a 12 megapixel rear camera and 12 megapixel front camera, the A14 processor, 4 gigs of RAM, which is a lot more modern, and same storage options, 64 or 256 gigabytes of storage. And that was the iPad 10. Came in a lot of really fun colors. And yeah, that's about it. Weird Apple Pencil stuff works really well for just using it as a tablet, but didn't really do a lot for people who wanted to use their iPads more than tablets. It wasn't much more capable than a smartphone anymore. That is the history, the long line of the base model iPads. If you want to see a video on the history of the minis, the Airs, or the Pros, let me know in the comments down below. But if you want to see any more videos on the iPad, I have some videos here. Till then, I'm Jake. This is Shot on my phone.